Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Sense of Things and another week and a week after inauguration. So, on to today's show, Ron's going to give us a little update on our friends, the Florida men. He's got some great articles on that, and you just have to kick off the new year. We haven't done it yet, so we had to get into our Florida mans for the year. In addition to that, Ron's going to talk about leading economic indicators. One of the things that used to be a good predictor of recessions, but has not been for the last 24 months. It's been in the negative. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to give you an update on our last show where we talked about some market moving events going into the inauguration. Now let's talk about the backside of that, what's been going on this week. So hold on. We'll be right back on in just 1 second. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. Ron, how you doing, bud?
Good morning, Jeff. No, things are good. Things are good. I had the inauguration. Things are kicking off. So now it's just a matter of buckling up and get your popcorn ready, and let's see how things move forward here.
Well, we had snowpocalypse in Texas, which, snowpocalypse for us. I saw somebody put it out on Facebook. They had a like a tape, or a measuring tape, and they had it setting in the snow, and it didn't even get above the little silver thing. And that was snowpocalypse. We shut our whole city down because of that. So,
But all the markets were sold out of bread and milk.
well, yeah, bread and toilet paper. Get it
Oh,
right.
excuse me.
That's in Texas. It's bread and toilet paper.
All right. Well,
So
there you go.
get it on the front end and the back end, apparently.
No, I hear you.
Um,
Well, look, there could be news stories that we cover all the time. I mean, obviously, we'll kick it off with some fun,
yeah.
and then we'll get into the LEI, which
Mhm.
I think this month, meaning really for the December reading, had some interesting things
Okay.
and kind of what they're identifying as moving forward. So, all right,
Okay.
let's
Cool.
get it going here.
Go ahead and share.
All right, here we go. So I think I may have done this one before, but he drove his truck into the ocean and said,
I
it's
was the one that did this one. I love this guy.
yeah, it's not his fault the truck doesn't surf." Now, by the way, there was no indication in the article, which I did not include, that he may have been inebriated. I'm not
I'm
sure.
just saying there might it. So you're saying there's a chance.
I hear you. And then we have this fella. Um, this guy basically went into the restroom in a Walgreens and brought in a bunch of junk food and just ate it. And he and basically when he was arrested after he indulged in sweets and various items inside a closed Walgreens for several hours, he said, "I just came in here to use the bathroom." Well,
And then I
certainly
got
after all
stuck.
the junk food and all the soda, he probably needed to use the bathroom.
I'm thinking so. And he was on a sugar high, or he had just collapsed from an insulin shock. So
Definitely. And then of course, we always have the smartest people, that live among us. This fella was caught a video purchasing a mask from a gas station before before walking across the street to burglarize an unlocked bank.
nice. I love this.
He was charged with burglary despite the fact that he only the only thing he walked was the mask that set him back $5.
This is great.
I mean, people realize that there are cameras everywhere.
Everywhere.
They are so inexpensive versus the old CCTVs.
Hmm.
Literally, I mean, you could basically put cameras all around your house for a couple $100.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and
Just
just people are just so ignorant, stupid, or just desperate. Who the hell knows? A combination of all
I
that
just
that they got to do this.
it is not, being smart is not a requirement of being a criminal.
No,
There
but
is
think
no
about also the
educational
guy at
requirement.
Walgreens. There's
I
cameras everywhere. They didn't see him putting all those chips and sodas and candies under his arm and going into the
going
bathroom.
into the bathroom.
I mean, even if the store's closed, they still got the cameras going.
Well, and I mean, every Walgreens I've ever been to, or any of those stores, they have the monitors right up above. You can see yourself on camera. So you didn't happen to notice that you were on camera as you were buying the stupid thing?
Crazy. All right, here we go. Let's have some fun. So I know when we did this, one of the shows last month in December,
Mhm.
that LEI was down 34 straight months. It was a
Yeah.
record amount of months it was down. And it kind of ticked up a little bit last month in some areas and ticked down again in December.
Mm.
And obviously, with the gray areas here are the recessionary periods. And we could probably come back to this, but I find what's very interesting is the following. If you really dig into the numbers here, actually, I'm sorry. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go forward one and then I'll come back. So
Okay.
the board already said about 6, 7 months ago they gave up
Mm.
on signaling a recession. So I'm trying to figure out like why is this group, which I believe is a nonprofit group, I don't know for
Mhm.
sure, in business?
Yeah.
Because they have basically said, look, we have proven data over time that when these numbers hit, there's a good chance of a recession within what 6 to 10 months. Now,
Absolutely. Yeah.
even though it didn't happen in that period of time, doesn't mean it won't happen. And I heard a couple of really good economists talking about, well, one of the reasons why it didn't happen yet, meaning something didn't break, was
Mhm.
because the government's been giving morphine to the American citizens with
Pretty
all
much.
the free money programs and the
Yeah.
and everything and obviously the government hiring people and
Mhm.
bloating up our government. So
Yeah.
we'll have to see what happens. But let's come back. We can drill into some of the details here.
Mhm.
I don't know what sticks out to you,
This is
but
where
I
it gets
will tell
good.
you, you see December and then you see 6 months ending in December. And
Yeah.
if you notice, December, the ISM orders here have just been in just a steady downcline.
Mhm.
And ISM is the manufacturing, and I know you had some numbers before on PMI and ISM,
Yeah.
and that's the most troubling to me. Whether or not the new administration thinks that, like what happened, try to do 8 years ago, bring that manufacturing back. This has been ominous. So we'll
Yeah.
have to see how things go for the next 6 months. But to me, that's the one thing that stands out. How about you?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, and it's this is, if you remember, we were looking at that, I would say starting in the fall of 2023 and rolling into most of last year. If you looked at those manufacturing indexes over and over and over again, they were just always down. And it was the same ones: New York, Richmond, all the kind of sector, the places where, okay, there was some actual manufacturing going on, and seeing those things just consistently down, it had to have effects on new orders. And, I think some of it was kind of coming into the election, not knowing who was going to be in charge. Was it going to be more of the same, or was it going to be different? And really going up to the election, not really, I think even election night, not really knowing what direction it was going to go. Yeah, I think a lot of these companies just started pulling back and saying, you know what, we're just going to hunker down. It's going to be interesting. I mean, this still rolled through December though. So
Yeah.
are we going to see a shift now after the inauguration? I think the thing that I was reading this week, I forget if it was in the Wall Street Journal or Financial Times, where they were talking about all these companies have set up like a Trump war room just so that they can understand. They've got people that are just reading all the executive orders and then trying to figure out, okay, well, how does this affect us? What should we
Yep.
do? How do we work around that? So I think probably a little bit more of the same here, at least for the next several months, would be my guess. So January, I mean, it's pretty much done at this point. They're in the middle of all that. Inauguration didn't happen until the 20th. So I would say January there. I would say February's numbers are really going to be the most telling of is that righted the ship a little bit.
Yeah, but the other thing that kind of also stands out are the building permits, private
Yeah.
housing, because even though it was slightly down in December, I mean, it's basically been flat for the
Mm-hmm.
last 6 months. And I don't know what the administration could do about mortgage rates because they're only slightly affected by the Fed rate.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you got the 30-year fixed over 7%.
Yeah.
So if they're going to stay over 7%, even with all the home builders, they may be sitting on land, but they're not going to be building spec housing with over 7% mortgage unless they're
Yep.
going to do financing on their own, which we've talked about. But even so, building permits are basically flat, so it's not
Mhm.
growing at all, and we have a
Yeah.
housing problem.
Yeah, and now have even a bigger housing problem in Southern California. Yeah, you're talking about and how are they even going to remotely rebuild at this point with
It's a
all the
5 to 10 year.
regulations? Yeah,
It's 5 to 10 years.
yeah, at least. And we're not talking, yeah, it was a lot of really rich people, but there was a lot of just average Joes that had houses that were, built in the 40s and everything else. They're never going to be able to rebuild that. There was a lady I saw interviewed on the news the other day that or I think it was in a news feed on my phone or something. She had a restaurant that had been there. It was a former home that was built in the 1930s and it got wiped out in
Oh,
Malibu.
easily.
And she's like, I'm never going to be able to rebuild because it was grandfathered in, but now with the new rules, she's like, I'm never going to be able to rebuild. So
Well, not
even if
only
I
that,
get
but a
the
lot of
insurance money.
people couldn't afford to put on the steel roofs, put
Yep.
on the fire retardant on paint on the side, put in the
Yep.
double pane glass. You know,
Yep.
that people couldn't afford to do that because number one, they couldn't afford the upgrades, but number two, they couldn't afford to move because where are they going to move to?
Yep.
Housing is so expensive, insurance is so expensive, and now think about it: what insurers, even though they've been fleeing left and right out of California for the last 20 years, what insurers moving forward are actually going to stay in California?
That can even afford to stay in California.
And
Yeah.
actually, from what I understood, I just heard this from a couple of different sources in the last couple of weeks that there were insurers that wanted to come in the
Mm,
last 5 years, but they were like, we can't do it at these premiums. They
yep.
have to do it at Y premiums. And the state insurance board said, no, you can't. If you want to come in, you have to charge the lower premiums. And they're like, it's not worth it for
Yeah,
us.
we can't. Yeah, we can't manage the risk at that point.
All right, so just a couple more. I just wanted to go back to this one here. So this being our last slide on this, kind of how they basically called off a recession. I think the
Mm,
couple of things that are very interesting is the 10-year got all the way up to 4.8 and then scaled back to 4.6. Has been kind of
mm,
vacillating around there. A lot of people, we always talk about the 10-year being the North Star with all this. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens here because I think if housing stays stagnant, I think that could be a potential catalyst, right? For if people start losing jobs and whatever happens with immigration, we could have a housing problem.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's interesting. We've been talking about government workers and things like that, about people being hired by the government, and then now with the government kind of demanding that people get back to work in offices and things like that. That's going to be an interesting thing because let's say you were a federal government employee that's employed out of Washington and you were able to work from home. So why would I live in expensive Washington? I could live maybe in Western Virginia or anywhere in the world. And now I got to go back to work and I can't, I'd have to move at that
Well,
point.
I thought it was interesting because they're looking very closely at this. There are literally thousands of buildings in Washington and the federal
They're
government
empty
that are basically either empty or have less than 10-15% occupancy.
occupancy.
And they're
Yeah.
just basically either going to consolidate or sell the buildings, and why not?
Yeah. Well, I mean, might as well use them for something because otherwise they're just going to decline because not like the government is going to keep upkeep on these things if they have nobody in them and they're not using them. So why not? I mean, that's when I remember before Trump got elected the first time, they bought the old post office, which is a beautiful building. It's a gorgeous building and bought the old post office. And that was a S show. But, I mean, in the end, why not use those buildings for something else? They're beautiful. It's wonderful real estate. So if the government doesn't want to use it, then let somebody else do it.
I
I
agree.
could see that. I honestly could see the federal government looking at, well, maybe we relocate because why do all these things need to be in Washington? That's the funny part is like, yeah, I understand it in the early days. You wanted everybody to kind of be close to each other, but why not relocate some of these agencies to other states and spread it out across the country? I think it would be smarter, quite frankly.
No, I agree. And we'll have to see what happens. I mean, I'm not a big fan. I know we've talked about this remote work, but especially in our business, I know it works for some, not for others, but we'll have to see. But on a last quick topic, it'll
Okay.
be interesting as we move forward here in the next couple of weeks doing some episodes on earnings. The tech
Yeah.
earnings have actually shown to be pretty strong. Some
Mhm.
bank numbers have been pretty strong. We got to see where a lot of the other consumer companies kind of come in. I think that's where you're going to find out how the holidays went with the
Mhm.
spending, and maybe it may be a precursor and a good indicator for 2025.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be looking for me. I'm going to be looking at Walmart, of course. I mean, Walmart, Target. If we still see a decline on the Target side and we still see Walmart doing well, that tells me that the consumer is still stretched at this point. So all those numbers should be coming up in the next week or two. So I think that's some things that I would want to keep my eyes on, because that tells me where the consumer is.
Percent.
If you look at the dollar stores and all that, they're just getting crushed right now. Their stocks are down massively because, I think one part of it is their margins are compressed, and two, even their consumer, which, that's the cheapest place you can buy stuff. And if they're struggling to even buy there, it's not,
Well,
it's
from what
not a
I
good sign.
understand, I don't know if it's 50% or not, but I know it's pretty, I think it's over 35 or 40% of Walmart's revenue is the
Yeah.
food and groceries.
Yeah.
So Procter and Gamble, I believe, has a second headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas, because of the amount of business that Walmart does with Procter and Gamble. And I think Campbell's and several of the other companies
Oh,
do
I'm sure they
also.
do. Well, I mean, the other problem is it's so insanely expensive to fly into Bentonville. When I worked for Fidelity, and I was supporting University of Arkansas, we were required to fly into Tulsa and drive the 3 hours from Tulsa to the UA
Couldn't take a
campus.
puddle jumper?
No, no, because the airport is so insanely expensive. The flights in there, because they know they've got, it's all executive people coming in to meet with Walmart. I mean, it was like $700 more, even flying on a little puddle jumper from Dallas to get in there. So we were required by the company to fly into Tulsa and then drive 3 hours to get into
So here's my ignorance. What's the nearest major airport?
Tulsa.
Seriously, okay.
Yeah, that it is the cold. I mean, you could fly into to Little Rock, but I mean, Little Rock's like 4.5 hours from the UA
That makes
campus,
sense.
and not a real fun drive. I mean, the other one isn't fun, but seriously, not a fun drive.
Right. Now
Well,
I
let
get it.
me let me share a little bit of what I was thinking about today. So I started looking at, if you remember the slides from the last show, it was market events moving into inauguration. And the first thing I let off with was executive orders. And this is interesting. And I'll share another screen here in a second. But so far, I think the intention is for President Trump to sign like 225. He signed somewhere around 26, 27 so far. So he's going to be signing, but quite a bit. But interestingly enough, and I'll show you this chart from online here, the most in history of executive orders, because remember we had that little chart a week ago and we were like, oh, Jerry Ford, Nixon, and all that. There was actually a swath of time from McKinley through Franklin Roosevelt where it was the highest amount of executive orders. I thought this was more of a new thing. It actually was a thing between the turn of the century, 20th century, up through Truman's administration. It was ridiculous and off the charts. So the
Yeah,
two
but don't
big,
forget, very quickly to interrupt,
yeah,
both of those were dealing with world wars.
yeah, of course. Yeah. So, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. They were using this, but I just, I thought this was more of a, an occurrence that happened in more current times where it was like, I just don't want to deal with, Congress and all that. I want to get my agenda going. But yeah, Franklin Roosevelt, 307 on average per year. So, I mean, he was dealing with the Great Depression, trying to get everything, the ship righted, and a major world war. So I mean, it makes sense that he did a lot. Woodrow Wilson, same thing. 225. We really didn't get into though the war until or 1916. So we were really only at war for a couple of years in that time period. So that may not be the biggest or the best excuse. Sometimes I think it's just an excuse to kind of use the executive for more power than they need. Let me go back here for a second. Whoa. Trying to get out of here, and I want to show this chart that I got off of. And this is off of, it's the Presidential History Project, and it's UC Santa Barbara. So it's the American President Project. Can you see that, Ron?
Barely.
Okay.
You could probably describe it.
Okay. So going back to our very first president. So this looks at every single president since the beginning of time. George Washington, 8 total orders. So he did 1 per year his entire time in office. He was there for 7.85 years. Going forward, it wasn't really much until we got to Ulysses S. Grant. And, it makes a lot of sense.
Another wartime.
Coming out of
actually post-war.
Yeah, Civil War period, restoration and all that. Makes sense. I mean, he was there for 8 years and he did a lot of stuff during that time period. Then it kind of fell out of favor again for a few years. And then after McKinley was killed, Theodore Roosevelt coming in, he was the first that really had the first 1,000 executive orders over his 8 years of presidency, the most up to that time on average per year, 145 per year. And then it was every president after that for the next 30 years or 40 years.
Yeah, that's the track record.
Yeah, Taft, 724, Wilson, 1803, Harding's 522, 1203, which it was really surprising for Coolidge, because Coolidge I saw as more of a kind of keep the government out of stuff. But he actually was one of the highest during that period. And then, of course, Roosevelt, 12 years in, of course, 3,721. He holds the record for the most, and he holds the record for the highest average, 107. Then it kind of fell out of favor again. It stayed in that 300 range until we got to the current era. And surprisingly enough, our last 3 presidents, Trump 1, Trump 2, and Biden, actually have been some of the lowest, which, it seems like it's been covered more, but they've actually been the lowest, and they've kept the average relatively low in comparison over the, when we look at the history of presidents from that point.
Gotcha.
So crazy. We talked about, Israel Hamas ceasefire and hostages coming home. It is official. The hostages coming home. I do not believe that Hamas is going to, there's enough crazy little factions of them and Islamic Jihad that I just do not see them following through with this. I mean, you already had somebody go into a market in Tel Aviv and stab a whole bunch of people. I just think there's not just one group that you're dealing with. You're dealing with a whole bunch of different factions, and a lot of them do not want to have a ceasefire. So this whole 60-day period, I think, is going to be very tenuous. It sounds like there's really only 30 some odd remaining hostages out of the 100 that they
right, but they've only released like 3 or 4. I don't understand that.
Yeah, they released 3, and then supposedly this Sunday they release another 3, and it's
oh my God, this is a bad deal.
Yeah, and it's like 100 Palestinians for 1 hostage. And
yeah, I know. I'm telling you, Hamas got what they wanted out of this.
Yeah,
I know,
which is what they always do. And a lot of these guys are ones that I'm reading Trey Yingst's book now, Bloody Saturday, I think it's called, or Black Saturday. And it's really good. If you really want to understand what went on during the October 7th, you really need to read that book, because he was right in the middle of all of that, reporting for Fox during that time period. And he really did an excellent job of interviewing really both sides of the equation, of all the people, from both the Palestinian view and from the Israeli view. And it's a really good book describing all that went on. And a lot of these people that they're returning are people that were captured during that attack. So they're basically giving away people who were murderers for getting their people back. Just heard last night that Trump has threatened sanctions on Russia if they keep trying to bombard, the power plants and stuff like that. which, I think that's the only way you're really going to get Russia to step back a little bit, is to slam them with some pretty big sanctions, and specifically their oil and all that, because that's where they're making money at this point. So that, I think, is going to be interesting. And then sanctions, but then enforcing those sanctions, I think that's going to get the parties to the table, and hopefully that conflict starts to cool down a little bit, because we are pouring billions of dollars into it every month.
And I hate to say it, I have no faith, but
Yeah, I don't either.
I'm hopeful, but no faith.
Yeah, I hope, I mean, the reality is it could very well be Putin pulls back just so he can lick his wounds a little bit and then go from there. It'll be interesting, the relationship, whatever you want to call it, with North Korea and Kim Jong-un, that Trump has with Kim Jong-un sometimes, of, can he put pressure on him to pull back his soldiers at that point. Another thing that we had, the big talk was drill baby drill. Well, I think it's not only going to be drill baby drill, but nuke baby nuke, with that introduction, and we'll talk about that in a second, the introduction of $500 billion investment from SoftBank.
We'll see if that happens.
AI, I think it will. I mean, they're already building this stuff in Texas. I mean, there's a big.
I know, but they know how Trump likes big numbers, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, its initial is 100 billion, but I mean, $100 billion, that's not too bad. And at least if we can start to get our heads around AI and get ahead of the world in that, and be the leader in AI, I think it'll happen. And like I said, they're putting their money where their mouth is here in Texas. Now, the problem is these type of data centers and things like that require massive amounts of power. And yes, we've got lots of natural gas. Yes, we've got lots of coal. We can drill baby drill and get, the oil prices down, but we're going to need something else. And, I mean, the rest of the world is nuclear. If you look at Europe, which is very green and everything else, they have massive amounts of nuke plants in Europe. And it was funny because a few years ago, they decided to start shutting those down because, they were concerned about all this. And then with the Putin situation, they fired those nuke plants back up because they need to do that. And
well, it also takes 10 years, I think, to build a new one,
yep.
Even with all the technology and everything else. So it's not like the power is, snap your fingers and you could, you're going to be there. It's going to take time.
Yeah, it's going to take time. And I think a big part of that is, the good part is we've gone so far from the 3 Mile Island type plants that were very inefficient. Even here in Texas, our largest plant, Comanche Peak, I mean, it was built like in 81, I think is when it went online, 81, 82. So that was the last plant that I'm aware of that's been built here in the country. So technology has moved so far ahead at this point, and they can build them a lot smaller and a lot safer now with better technology than they ever could before. So I see that as the future, whether, environmentalists like that or not. I just see it as the future at this point. So, I think those are the things that I'm looking at after the inauguration that are having some major effects. Of course, interest rates are still going to be hanging out there, and that's not something that's going to get fixed overnight. A lot of that, what we were talking about, those 10-year interest rates, a lot of those are driven by the market. And I think the market is still uncertain about, well, is Trump going to have any tariffs? Is that going to happen? He already talked about kind of backing off of that a little bit this week. So I think the market's going to have to, the bond market's going to have to kind of get their hands around this, or understand or get their heads around this a little bit.
I hear you. Well, like I said, a lot of the Trump stuff, we'll have to see how it pans out. And the Israeli-Russian thing, I'm hopeful, but I don't have a lot of faith.
Yeah, I do. I hope we get back to a world where we don't have a whole bunch of major conflicts. I mean, the good part is I think, in the first few hours when he was being interviewed by the press while he was signing some stuff, they brought up Israel, and he was very blunt and said, that's their conflict. It's not ours. So they need to resolve it themselves. We're there to support them as an ally, but I hope that we don't, have to put soldiers on the ground or anything like that. We still don't know what's going to happen with Syria, because that's a whole crazy mess now too, but I think the biggest part is most likely I would see sanctions on like Iran and things like that, which will stop the money flow going out of there into some of those crazy places that, people are launching rockets out of. So hopefully that will, calm things down a little bit in the Middle East. It's never going to.
Thank God we don't need an Iron Dome.
Yeah, I know. That I was reading in Black Saturday, and just the level of that, and the fact that every child is taught, if you hear a rocket, just dive to the ground. That's just not. That's not a life I would
imagine living like that.
Yeah, or having your neighborhood bomb shelter. I really don't want to have to live in a place where I have to have a neighborhood bomb shelter.
I gotcha. Well, when Texas succeeds from the Union, then you can start building your shelters.
No, they don't want us to succeed, or they don't want us to secede at this point. So yeah, we're not going anywhere anytime soon.
I hear you. Okay.
Well, cool, man. Thanks a lot for putting your stuff together, Ron. And folks, we are here for you. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you are watching every episode, because we're going to be on this. We're going to be watching this stuff, as we go in here. Certainly with Ron's talk about the LEI today, we certainly need to see, probably starting in February, what those numbers are going to look like, and keep your eyes on the earnings reports coming out, because I think it's going to be an interesting, kind of finger in the wind to see where the winds are going at this point. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you guys back here the very next time.